And recording. Are we live? I think we are live. So, welcome everybody. Thanks again for joining us on another episode of Awakening Consciousness with Asher and Jesse. Glad you could join us again today. Got another good show for you planned. So the Tennessee legislature passes some C-19 stuff. We're going to talk about that. Some good news. And Gavin Newsom, he is kind of on the other side of that. So Tennessee stands for freedom, and Gavin Newsom in California, not so much. So kind of a bummer for people living in California, but what do you expect when you're living around a bunch of soy boy pussy socialists? So we're going to talk about that and go over some other news, and be a nice good show for you today. But before we get started, I'd like to take a second to focus our energies and intentions on the world that we want to build. We want to build a world and a community of like-minded people to grow, survive, and thrive together in the new world to come. The new world is it's kind of a scary place for a lot of people, but if you are on this side or in our community, I think, or at least we've tried to articulate a brighter picture for what's coming. So there might be some challenges ahead, but getting through those challenges will be, I think, a fun test of our strength, of our resolve. And once we get through that, we'll be a lot stronger and in a much better place going forward. So thank you for that. And let's get started. So
let me mention one thing. I think we're on our backup channel here, correct? On YouTube?
Yeah.
Or no?
We are on our backup
so
channel.
we're kind of permanently relegated, right, to our backup channel. Every time we go back to the main channel, they give us another strike. You know, that they may kick us off of YouTube here at some point. We're trying to get over to Rumble. I mean, we are on Rumble and other places, but we'll eventually be live streaming there. Me and Asher were just having this conversation this morning. You know, if anybody out there listening to this channel has any thoughts or is an expert on, you know, how do you grow a content as a content? Are we content producers now, providers, creators? I don't know.
Content creators, yes.
Yes.
You know,
as people creating content, which feels very strange to say that. How would you grow that basically without the use of YouTube? If anyone has strategies around that, we'd love to hear them. We were just talking about that this morning. You know, it's like YouTube doesn't like us, so we need to grow our community elsewhere. And I don't know, elsewhere seems to all have significant limitations. So anybody's a whiz out there on, sort of new earth, content creation, distribution, and so on and so forth, let us know. We'd love to hear about it. But yeah, we are on the backup channel, and we do get over to all those all platforms, and please like, share, subscribe over there as well. And we appreciate you tuning in.
Yes. And it's likely later today that we will have an interview with someone she's a scientist. She's worked with PCR technology for 25 years. And this was sort of the leg in the stool that once it was kicked out, then the whole COVID narrative crumbled. And so she came to it from knowing and understanding PCR technology. We've referenced that a couple times on the show, but she has a much better understanding of it than us, and we're going to go over that hopefully today, hopefully this afternoon with her. So looking forward to that. But without further ado, let's get into today's show. So let's see. So Tennessee legislature passed a sweeping COVID rules bill overnight. After hours of deliberation and the formation of a legislative conference committee, the Tennessee legislature passed a 21-page omnibus COVID-19 bill early Saturday morning to close its special session. Um, the bill in its original form gained negative attention from several businesses in the state, including the Ford Motor Company, which was subject of last week's special session when the legislature approved $884 million in spending related to Ford's $5.6 billion electric truck factory outside of Memphis. Goes on to say, we heard from a number of businesses and groups regarding proposals, including Ford and we have told them to reach out directly to the legislatures. The final bill said government entities cannot force private businesses to institute a mask mandate or COVID-19 V mandate, and private businesses cannot take action against an employee for not receiving the V, and cannot compel an employee or visitor to show proof of V. So that's good. You know, that's a win. We should celebrate the wins when we get them. And so a Democratic Senator, Jeff Yarbrough, said this is a reckless way to legislate. But I think Jeff can, he can go stick himself, or he can go jab himself. So there you go. So yeah, Tennessee passes a bill, no forced masking, no forced Ving, and you can't retaliate against employees who don't take part in the jabbing of themselves with gene altering therapies. So a win for the good guys. And you know, I'm reminded of Catherine Austin Fitts, who is a Tennessee resident, who one of the reasons why she said she moved to Tennessee was because I think she said that more than half of the registered voters are members of the Tennessee Gun Association. So, you know, you have a lot of gun owners, and you have, when there is a population of informed and armed people, the government has to more reflect the will of the people. And I think that's what's happened in Tennessee. And I think that's a good thing. So people in Tennessee, that's a good thing happened. So there you go.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's really good news on its face, obviously, and welcome good news, right? It's not a time we get a ton of good news. So great news. It's further evidence, of course, of the split, of the divide. And it's encouraging, actually, that we're seeing the divide on that level, right? It's like we see what's going on in Florida and we see in other places. And then me being very conspiratorially minded, basically understanding the cabal pretty well, or as well as I do, not knowing how real that stuff is, right? Like not knowing is DeSantis like actually sort of an independent operator kind of pushing against the powers that be, or is there, is there some sort of play that's in? So seeing this happen at this level in a place like Tennessee, really good news. And yeah, to your point, really interesting to see that the will of the people, I hesitate to use that phrase, but the will of the people can actually still kind of get done a little bit, right? In certain places. Cause there's certainly, cause yeah, if you look at what's going on in places like California, not all of California at all, but, in the very liberal California cities, even though the will is being manipulated and the people are being duped, it's still the will of the people that's being implemented. So if we're seeing some more of that play out, great. And of course, it's interesting in the context, it's the cabal, I don't think wants this happening. So I'm sure they're working very hard behind the scenes and, bribing who they can bribe and threatening who they can threaten and using whatever info they have and whatever leverage they have on people they can use. So the fact that this is still happening in the face of being very much against the cabal's agenda, interesting also, and good news. And then, of course, the next thought that comes to mind is, well, this is not good news for the cabal. So what comes next, right? And Matt talked about this a little bit, touched on it very briefly in our interview with him that we did on Friday. And but it's like, yeah, are we facing a major event, a major false flag, or some major storyline as the narrative continues to fall apart, as the cabal's side of things it continues to look just stupider and stupider, right? Just they keep getting more becoming more exposed, and it becomes more obvious, and then they have to do even crazier things to keep it going, and then that exposes them more, and it becomes more obvious. So where do they go from here as their narrative is falling apart? The other piece that plays in here, right, or two other pieces, is that when you have the top-down control model, right, the control a pyramid sort of model where you have that top that controls everything below it, that's harder to do when you have more decentralized power. And of course, the lower you get from the federal government, the more decentralized it is. So we have federal, then we have state, right? Then we have local, then we have, so it's harder for them to control state legislatures and things that happen at the state level. And it's, even harder, of course, at the local level, and harder below that, school boards and things like that. So, so it's great to see, states seeing evidence of there being a lack of control potentially, right, at the state level. It's encouraging. And then the last piece is, it's just so interesting. You were talking about informed people, right? Basically, you could use the word smart, right, if you wanted to. But we're talking about informed people, and it's really interesting because the media has been telling us, at least this was the message I got. The media has been telling us essentially that Southerners are stupid, right? For my whole life, right? I've been told basically that conservatives and Southerners, also being, of course, those things being somewhat related, conservatives and Southerners basically are just backwards, stupid, ignorant, uninformed, racist type people. This is the message that's been put into the consciousness of people for a long time. And as we go through this process and we see the split and we see the divide materialize, that group that's been so ridiculed and made fun of and made to look stupid and laughed at and, Bible toting, idiots, right? They're the smart ones in this, clearly, right? And they're the ones that are on the right side of this, and pushing back and standing in their sovereignty and saying no. So I find that really interesting as well, and as we go through this.
And right. So like if I say informed, okay, so define informed, right? Because I bet you would find a whole bunch of people who live in New York and San Francisco who could spout off, whatever CNN or MSNBC or any of those left-leaning things are saying, and they could present a bunch of quote unquote facts that they've heard on those networks, and they would sound very smart because they've gone to prestigious schools and all that stuff, but they are the most duped people in all of this, and so it's like, okay, so define informed on this. And I think you're right, that programming, Southerners, God, guns, and what is it? God, guns, and what's the other one? There's a third G. God, guns, and Bible. Right? No, that's anyways. But yeah, that is the stereotype, and I was subjected to that too when I lived up in the north. And so I think they've tricked these white collar educated liberals into thinking that, well, if stupid Southerners think it's one way, then it's obviously the other way because they're so stupid and backwards. And then I think that also plays into the whole Trump thing, where they were going to go against whatever Trump said no matter what, and unless he's bombing Syria, then they were all for it. But everything else, he was everything else, like they took the opposite opinion regardless of what it was. And so it's like they set themselves up to be the biggest dupes on the planet. And I think that's playing out. The other thing that you mentioned was, what was it? You made a good point that I wanted to comment on.
Here, while you were talking, I took my notes, which are only 3 lines, and this probably covered everything. So it's good news in Tennessee. It shows the divide. It's not good for the cabal. What comes next? Making smart people teams. Go. Yeah.
What comes next? So the cabal is getting exposed, and their hand, they've played their hand. At this point, I don't know that they could ever go back and be taken seriously, respected, not living in danger, and because people are upset now. This is they're to the point where they've made a lot of people pissed, to the point where they're not coming back. Like, we are not, oh well, if I just vote harder next time, then it'll be fine. And once we get the good people in power, then it'll be totally fine. No. For many people, they have the veil has been lifted, and we see things for what they are. But that creates a situation. It's almost like a cornered animal. A cornered animal is very dangerous, and they can, they have a lot of power and influence, and they could come back with a whole host of things that could put more and more pressure on people to comply. And we've talked about supply chains, we've talked about the power grid and all that stuff there. So at this time, we have to watch out for the cornered animal to strike back in almost flailing about uncontrollable ways. And so I think that's the thing that we should be sort of paying attention to and be wary of.
Yeah, and I know you have other articles you want to get to, so I'll just make this last point and leave it there. But you were talking, I mentioned about sort of the South, stereotypes and those kinds of things, and then you were mentioning about being informed and what does that mean. And I just want to drive that point home, right? If education, if the point of education is indoctrination, right? If that's the point of it, and if you go back to John Taylor Gatto's work, if I'm getting that name right, he wrote an interesting book I read some years back, and others, who even Noam Chomsky, right? Even though I don't know what happened to that guy, but he talked, lots of people have written about this extensively, but so if you accept that the point of education is to get people to believe a certain thing, think a certain way, right, accept certain things, etc., if education is essentially indoctrination, then it's only logical that the more educated would be the most indoctrinated, right? And that's certainly what we see. So if you've gone to, finished high school, and then you've done college, and then you've done graduate school, and maybe you've done a postmaster's or, whatever. I mean, it would be hard to imagine you having survived all of that and thrived, obviously, to the degree that you got your degree, right? And going through all of that and not be fully indoctrinated, right? And of course, you have all the tools at your disposal. You're really smart at that point, right? Like you've been given all the tools to sound very bright in that context. So you have all the tools. You're convinced that you're a genius by that
certificate to prove it.
Right, a shiny certificate. And you've been told how smart you are, of course, for all these years as you progressed up the academic ladder, and you're now fully indoctrinated. So you're going to believe whatever it is you've been taught to believe. So, yeah, I just want to drive that home, that really it is an inverse relationship between freedom of thought and education. Like those are inverse relationships.
Oh, totally. Yeah, the education system is set up to create obedient workers. That's what it's set up to do. It's not set up to create critical thinkers who are, questioning things. Science can't be science, quote unquote, can't be questioned these days because they're scientists and they have fancy lab coats. And why would you not believe them? So, it's a crazy situation, and I think your point is spot on. So let's move on to the next article. We got Gavin Newsom, gruesome Newsom, out of Governor of California, who just coasted past his recall. So we have a lot of people in California who are loving the mandates, loving the V's, and can't wait to get their fourth booster shots. So Governor Gavin Newsom said Friday he remains firmly behind the state mandate for students and teachers to wear masks as in-person instruction resumes across the state, despite multiple legal challenges, including one planned by the Orange County Board of Education. Newsom, during a visit to the school in San Bernardino County, said the mask mandate is critical to limiting spread of C-19 and keeping campuses open. So here we go. We have, it's a tale of two worlds. You have one place who, I would say more grounded, down to earth people who are standing up and saying no to the V's and to the masks and all that stuff. And then you have this state with you have the most opulent wealth and the biggest poverty in the country, and it's, this sort of socialist paradise over there where, they clamor about income inequality, but they have the biggest income inequality of any state. They claim to do a whole bunch of things, and they're, they claim to be tolerant and open to ideas and different people and all that stuff, as long as you're not a Republican or on the right or anything like that. They're, they claim to be,
as long as you don't disagree with them in any way.
And it's like, they're the biggest hypocrites in the world. Like, they claim that the South is, backwards and racist and all this and that. But, you could prance around in any type of rainbow flag, gay pride thing in the South, and you wouldn't be in any physical danger. But if you walk down Market Street in San Francisco with a Trump MAGA hat on, you would be attacked and, maybe thrown, maybe had feces thrown at you, which is littered all over the streets. And so, it's a pretty stark dichotomy between the two places. And, it's only getting worse. We're hearing all kinds of stories out there in San Francisco where Walgreens is pulling out all of its stores, and they're just making shit up. They're saying, Walgreens says, oh, well, there's a theft problem. Too many people are coming in and stealing stuff, and we can't make money, so we're going to leave the city. And so then they demonize Walgreens for
being racist.
Being racist and not serving the community, and and then there were only 2 reports of shoplifting in this Walgreens, when it's like, and they found a setup like literally a few blocks away from the Walgreens with multi-million dollars worth of merchandise for sale. And they're claiming that it only happened 2 times. And it's like they're lying, they're flat out lying to your face to try to make themselves look good, and it's just like it's crumbling, it's falling apart. People there are walking zombies, and it's they're gonna reap what they sow. So good luck to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I mean, in places like that, like the collapse is a lot further along, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just sort of like, I mean, it's like if you look at Venezuela, right? It's like, places like San Francisco are like the Venezuela of the U.S. If Venezuela is the Venezuela of
Yeah.
Latin America, which, by the way, Venezuela is a great example, right, of how this stuff goes, because Venezuela was the wealthiest country in Latin America for decades. It was it was like the Paris of Latin America. I mean, really, it was a thriving, very wealthy society, wealthy country with amazing innovation and technology, the whole nine, and is now a collapsed state. And the only difference between one and the other was we've had now 33 years of socialist rule in Venezuela, and it is now a collapsed state. So it's not that different from California's story, right? California was kind of the shining beacon on the hill of the U.S. You had Silicon Valley and all.
It was a right-leaning state all the way up until after Reagan, when they let all they had a flood of immigrants in, and then it went left, and it's spiraling downhill. And they also have further to fall, because they were way up here, and now they have further to fall. Like you go to a country town in Tennessee, they're not rich, it's not a wealthy area, a lot of places here, but it's a much more grounded, sustainable way of living. And the crash or whatever we're going to experience on a sort of worldwide or countrywide scale is not going to affect them that much. There's not that much to fall there. And so it's places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, which is Silicon Valley. Those places have a lot further to fall. And so, enjoy the ride from a far enough away vantage point. So.
And so those shiny objects come at a price, don't they? It's like the rewards of the matrix of the beast system. They come with their price. And so yeah, I think that's part of what we're seeing as well. And just to hammer home that story on Walgreens, and I haven't looked at that. I looked at it for 5 seconds when it came out some months back. But basically, what they did was they decriminalized petty theft in San Francisco, and so people can now walk into a place like Walgreens and just steal everything, and there's nothing that Walgreens can do, because if they call the police don't do anything, because it's not a criminal offense. And so the secure, I remember seeing this video of this guy, stealing stuff out of a Walgreens in broad daylight with no attempt whatsoever to hide what he's doing. Security guards standing there, he's not authorized to do anything. The store manager, whoever, says to like the security guard or someone, like, should we call the cops? Security guards go like, nah, like they're not going to do anything, right? So you're in this situation where they've literally incentivized theft, and they've made the stopping of said theft impossible. Because I guarantee if a store owner put out a gun and shot the thief in the face, he would face repercussion for sure. So you've set up a game where the incentive is to encourage that behavior, and then the outcome, of course, is collapse. We're talking about this small little scale; it's just an example of it. But in this small way, it's the collapse of Walgreens, right, in that area, right? It's the collapse of and at a bigger scale retail in that sort of area. And that's the only possible outcome. And they understand that, right? So none of these people are stupid. They're not destroying these places by accident. They understand what they're doing. And then those crises that come as a result of their legislation and so forth, they will be very ready to act on, those crises to implement the next piece of the agenda, which of course, it will be more control and more control for them over every aspect of your life, as they solve, their self-created crises.
Yeah, and it's also we're just hearing about Walgreens. So Walgreens is it's a name that everyone can recognize because it's a national, probably international pharmacy chain. But how many other, mom and pop stores that we would have, no way of recognizing because we don't live in San Francisco. My dad used to, and I've spent a decent amount of time there, but I wouldn't recognize the names of all the other stores that have closed down, which I bet there are hundreds, if not thousands of stores who have also closed down. And so you're gonna see this sort of, this empty, boarded up, vacant building. The first and maybe second floor of all these buildings are going to be empty and vacant, and it's going to be like a ghost city, and turn into something like Detroit was when all the auto manufacturers left and all the wealth was sucked out of the city. And so I think you're going to see a very similar situation. I remember having a conversation with my wife about okay, so you're normalizing and encouraging mask wearing at the same time you decriminalize petty theft. What the hell do you think is going to happen? I mean, it's like all the incentives are there. It's like Democrats, liberals, or whatever. It's like they fundamentally don't take into account human motivation and incentives when they're putting in policies. They just, if we raise taxes like this, we'll get X amount more money. And it's like, well, no, some people are going to leave. Other people are going to change their as a business owner. Yeah, they're going to change their, we were a California corporation and now we moved to Florida because they have a better tax setup for small businesses. And so it's like, people leave, people respond to the incentives that you set up. And, and it doesn't just work out like a linear equation when you say, oh, I'm going to raise taxes this much, therefore this much more revenue. And it's like, it doesn't work like that because people make changes to their behavior and to their strategies. And it's like, they don't see it. Maybe they do and they don't care. I don't know. It's just, it's crazy.
Well, it's ultimately it's an avoidance of self-responsibility. Like that's what it all comes down to. It's like, drug use is a big problem. Okay, let's just give everyone free needles and that will stop the spread of, oh crap, that made it so that there's needles everywhere. Petty theft is a problem. Well, let's just decriminalize it, and that way we won't have our jails filled up with guys stealing a $2 thing. Like, sure, right? Like, that's right. It makes sense on that level if you don't think it through any further. Oh wait, that we've actually incentivized it now, and it's destroying our city. But yeah, a lot of that stuff just comes down to, it's like the political left seems to want to always blame everything on the collective and not ever sort of allow for someone's actions to be their own responsibility. And I'm not a heavy-handed like law enforcement guy. Like that's not where I come from ideologically. That being said, everybody needs to experience everyone does experience the results of their own actions. And if you create a society that avoids that as much as possible, it ends in collapse. It ends in, you always use the word soy boy, which is just hilarious. But that term like came about after I left the States. So I never really lived in that, we're hearing that. So it's still really funny to me, even though it's probably like 10 years old. But that if you have a bunch of people, right, who are so disconnected from their true nature, that what's important to them is like that their hair is purple, and that their sexual identity, and they're sort of like all of the weird sort of stuff that's happened in their life that normally people kind of don't talk about and try to deal with on their own. That's sort of like the basis of their identity and the basis of their sort of, who they are and what they're about. When you have a whole society like that, right, where we've moved so far away from God that we're fighting about sexual like identity or something in public, right? We're fighting about sexual identity, and that's important, right? It's not about family and God and spiritual growth and whatever. It's about whether you accept the color of my hair or not or something, right? Like when we've gone to that extreme and gotten away from morality and from values to that point, of course, the result is going to be a collapsed society. One point I want to make very quickly about Gavin Newsom, right? What's really happening here. Okay, so the mask is a symbol, right? This is just symbolism, and the cabal operates through symbolism always, and the mask is a huge symbol. And so, really, the mask debate, really what every human understands on a subconscious level, and probably a lot understand even on a conscious level, is that this is a debate between, am I a slave or not? Right? The slave master is saying to you, put this on, slave. And the slaves are like, I don't fucking want to put that on. Right. And so this is the actual crux of that matter. What the reason it's so important to the cabal, right? The reason that Gavin Newsom is like, I'll give on anything, but I'm not giving on masks. It's the crux of my agenda, right? Or something. He said it's the most important thing to save and to blah, 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 whatever language he used. The reason that is so important to him is because he's responsible for a whole generation of Californians, right? Kids who are going to accept symbolically their slavery from whatever age they're at, right? From that very young age. And so it's a fight of, are you a slave or not? That's what the mask fight is, but no one says that. No, we're not going to say that. We're going to pretend, we're going to argue whether it helps health or not. We're going to argue whether it's personal freedom choice or not. We're going to make all these arguments, but the bottom line is that's what the argument is. And so that's very important to the cabal, that symbolically you accept your slavery and you cover your voice, you cover your breathing, you literally limit your body's pranic intake, right? Like the intake of life force that exists all around us. You limit your body's intake of life, and you limit your ability to speak and express yourself, and you literally accept your slavery. That's what they're trying to do. And humanity, those of us who sort of understand that, at least at some subconscious or visceral level, we're like, I'm not fucking covering my face, like do whatever, like say what you want, tell me I'm not covering up my face because I'm not a slave, right? And so that's actually what that debate is. Like, are you a slave or not? It's a slave master who's pretending they're not the slave master, telling the slave, you have to be a slave, and here's, remain a slave. And the slave, who hasn't fully identified necessarily the slave master as a slave master, right, saying, wait, no, I think you're trying to subjugate me here. Like, I'm not doing that, right? So that's what's happening there, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that is what it is. And we can go on like, well, the one of the overarching common themes for people who are getting sick, because at the same time we've debunked the whole virus myth. There is no virus. Our viruses don't exist in the way that we think them. But let's put that aside for a second. People are getting sick in new and different ways, and one of the common themes is your body's inability to process oxygen. So, and then we can go into, well, the mask further restricts your oxygen, so why would you do it? But no, you're 100% right. It's about, are you going to comply with what I tell you, regardless of the health implications? We can demonstrate, uh, you know, clearly that it's not good for you, but you have to do it anyways. And so that's why it was such a big thing for me, and why it remains a big thing for me. I will not put a mask on my face, and that means, I'm going to Texas this weekend, and it's a 16-hour drive, but I'm not going to get on a plane because I'm not going to wear a mask, and that's just it. And that's my line, and I'm not going to cross it. And so, like, because I understand what it's about for them. It's not about health. It's not about keeping people safe. If that is such a thing, it's about, are you going to comply? Are you going to go along with the nonsense because we told you? And for me, it's just not an option. And so I'm driving 16 hours rather than flying 2 hours. And that is a choice that I'm willing to accept in my life. If it requires a mask, I'm not doing it. And so, I think people have to have really clear lines in their life where they draw them. So that's mine. Other people might be your skin, nothing penetrating your skin. But for me, it's the mask.
Yeah. And wherever, someone comes down on that, idea, the bottom line is, regardless of what you believe about that, what I'm about to say is still true, which is that if everybody drew that line, it would be over, right?
Yeah.
In one day. So,
yeah.
So that line that you've drawn, and when I say everybody, that's actually not correct at all. If just some reasonable percentage of people, felt the way you did about that, and just wouldn't put it on no matter what, end of story. Like, let's say 30%, right, of the population, that would be the end of it. Like, there wouldn't be nobody would say another word about masks ever again.
Yeah, if we're to the point where, it's 3 jabs to keep your job in some places and with some companies, because people didn't stand up in the beginning. It would have been so much easier to take a stand right in the beginning. No, I'm not going to do this. And then it's over. There is no 2 weeks to flatten the curve, because people say, no, screw you, I'm not doing that. That's a bunch of nonsense, and I'm going to go about my life. If everyone, or like you said, if a motivated minority of people stood up and did that, it would have all been over in the beginning. And now we're here because people didn't have the courage or the balls or whatever it is to stand up and say no. And so now we have to do it now, and it's more difficult now, but the stakes are higher. And so are people going to come through, step up, or not? And that's the question that we're facing these days. And it's because we didn't stand up in the beginning. And additionally, right now is the easiest time to stand up and say no, because tomorrow it's going to be a little bit more difficult, and the next day it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So the easiest time, just from how can I make my life the easiest, would be to do it right now, not tomorrow, not the next day, right now, because it's going to get harder tomorrow. So if you're just thinking it from a strategic standpoint, the easiest way to do it is right now. So, and it would have been a year and a half ago, almost 2 years at this point. So,
yeah, it's a really important point, right? Like, from a strategic standpoint, it's not about anything else. Just strategically speaking, this it's a really important point. And then the other piece of that, right, is like, how are you going to react to the next thing they do? Because that's coming right now. Like, I don't know, is it going to be this month, next month, the month after? I don't know. But the next thing they do, whether it's a new medical paradigm, or whether it's supply chain or terrorist attack, or or cyber attack, or or whatever they do, and I don't have that list in front of me. There's a million things, we all know them. Whatever they do, it's going to happen. It's going to happen soon. It's going to be the same paradigm in the sense of, okay, now you should be really afraid, and now you should accept this other thing we want to do now to help you feel more safe. That's coming, and we will have another chance at that point to nip it in the bud as a species, right? To just end it in one shot as a species and just not go along with any of it, call them out as the liars and frauds they are, stand up, no, regardless of the psychological games they play, right? Because they like with this thing that is happening now on Earth, it's this huge psychological game that if you want to stand up for your rights as a human, you're killing grandma, right? Like those fuckers, man. What a trick they played psychologically, where it's like if you're standing up for yourself, you're kind of automatically evil because they're presenting this paradigm that says that the solution they have for this thing that's happening, we're going against. And of course that means death and destruction, right? And sickness and all these sorts of things. So very likely the next thing that happens is also going to have those sorts of psychological elements to them. So, okay, good. We've seen their game. We've seen how that works. We know what that's all about. And we'll have another test here soon for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So get ready for that. All right. I do want to go over everybody nonchalantly. Yep. Get ready for that. It could be, it'll be fun.
Well, and sorry, one other thing, extremely briefly, just back to your point, and it's kind of the overall points, but the separation that's taking place is happening on every level. So even within a place like the US, right, we have separation taking place. We've talked about this a lot. So it's definitely a good time, in my opinion, to find your tribe, find your people, be where you want to be at. It could get harder to move around. It could get, just more dicey in general here in certain ways as we go forward. But there's pockets of safety. There's pockets of high vibe energy. There's pockets of like-minded people that have sprung up here everywhere. So I don't think there's anywhere probably in the world where you could be where there aren't pockets of that. So, definitely an interesting time to be reevaluating and reassessing those kinds of things. Something obviously we talk about a lot.
Yep. Another thing, another bit of good news. White House eases V mandate enforcement amid fears of dropped contracts. So the White House is giving federal contractors more flexibility in how they enforce the V mandate amid fears that the edict would cause companies to drop contracts. So we're seeing a bunch of this stuff all over the place where, people are not having it. They're not going along with the mandate. And I think this is a sign that they've sort of had to walk back some of the stuff that they are putting out. And a lot of time, think of this as sort of a negotiation. They open with a big, huge claim or a big, huge ask, a big price or something like that. In a negotiation, you always start off with a big ask or a big, this, and then you walk it back. And so, this looks like what's happening, and we can only hope that it continues. But again, it goes to what we were saying earlier. This is the
I can't hear you. You're on mute, Ash.
Sorry. So this is the time that you have to stand up, step up, and say no, because they're walking it back. They realize that they have overstepped what people are willing to go along with, and they're starting to see some repercussions and all of that stuff. They're trying to sort of obfuscate and lie about, oh, there's a supply chain shortage because there's so much demand, and oh my God, look at that, when it's really like, truckers are walking off, and there's a bunch of people who are not willing to go along with it, and it's starting to actually show up in real life situations. And so they have to walk it back, and the degree to which they walk it back depends on our reaction to it. And so if we just don't go along, the system can't survive without us. The system needs us people to continue it and to keep it going. And so they can't do it without us. And we, as soon as we realize that, as soon as we realize our power, things will go a lot better.
Yeah. That's the critical. I mean, that's sort of like the linchpin, right? There is no. We're the prize. we're the prize. We are the prize. We are everything. That the whole game is based on us. It's all surrounding who gets the humans, right? Basically, do we get to control ourselves, or do we rock with God, or like do we get eaten by an invisible species, essentially, right? So the whole game is around us. It's around humans. That's right. We remove ourselves. There isn't even a game anymore. We take. The system needs us. Yeah, the system doesn't exactly. The system needs us, and it doesn't exist without us. It's created for us. Without us, there's no prize. And so, the system. Yeah, absolutely right. So totally, it's just a mental game, and the entire thing just comes down to what we believe, right? So will we enslave ourselves on purpose? No, not on purpose. Will we enslave ourselves unintentionally through our thoughts and beliefs and what we go and actions? That's it, right? Like that's the whole thing. And so yeah, right. We're out here like, we're out here, talking about consciousness all the time, because that's the only game that's in town. Like that's all there is where are humans at consciously? Because if we're at a high enough level, we're free. And if we're not, then we end up in situations like Venezuela and San Francisco, and much, much, much worse as we go forward.
Yeah. And, your weakness is your, reliance on the convenience of what the system provides, and it's your dependence. And so if you are living in a big house with a huge mansion and you got boats and cars and all that stuff, well, you're going to be less likely to be able to say no to your employer who says, well, we're going to fire you from your $200,000 a year job unless you go along with it. Well, if you've set yourself up to where you need that income to be able to survive, whereas you could have just downsized your life and, lived off savings and that kind of stuff until you figured something else out. How dependent are you on the system? How dependent are you on the debt that you've accumulated and all that stuff? And so the more you can sort of extricate yourself, the more power and control you will have in your own life.
Absolutely. Did you have more articles you were trying to get to today, or was that it?
Well, there's one last one that I just want to just bring up real briefly. It's Yahoo pulls out of China for good. So this is probably a bigger topic that we should touch on, the whole China thing. But Yahoo has shut down access to its services in China, becoming the latest American tech company to exit the country. It pulled the plug in recognition of increasingly challenging business and legal environment. So yeah, this is, I think it's a trend that is happening and will continue to happen. If you're a CEO of a major company and you're opening up business in China, new business in China, that's going to be looked on not so well by the public. I think there's a growing realization of the atrocities that the Chinese government is perpetrating on its people. We have the Uyghur situation, which is a Muslim minority that's literally being interned in concentration camps, and they're harvesting organs and all that stuff. And so, the Chinese Communist Party is, doing a bunch of evil things, and it's starting to come out. And I think, and you go back and you sort of look at their, they think in much longer terms than we do, and much longer terms than we give them credit for. Their plan is to sort of take over and become the superpower of the world and have, people essentially bow down to China. And they're doing it in a lot of ways, including, they're sending fentanyl into the US. They're, who knows what they're putting in their products. I would not buy products from China. I would not, especially not buy food from China or children's toys or anything like that. So I would be very careful about anything that you're getting involved with China, because they have a sort of world domination plan, and they're enacting it. And I think people haven't woken up yet to that fact. And so the less we can depend on China, I'm speaking for the US and the world in general, the better.
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes back to a previous point about this being a battle for consciousness, for people's thoughts. 1 second, and we get into then the longer term plans of the cabal, right? Which has to do with potentially a large scale sort of World War III and sort of power shifting from west to east and over to China, and then using the Chinese model, which is the model they'd like to go to, which is a communistic authoritarian model. They've been working on that in China forever. And so that comes back to the importance of the US, right? If we look at peoples around the world, the US, I know, buddy, just give me 1 second. The US is one of the freest, if not the freest places on earth. And it's arguably the only place where people actually believe they're free and really value that. Like, we can argue all day about, are Americans really free or not? And I would come down on the argument of absolutely not, right? But in comparison to a place like China, those people have been defeated mentally a long time ago. I don't know when, I don't know, hundreds of years, thousands of years, I don't know how long ago, but a very long time ago. In the part of the world that I live in, that sort of mentality is not as strong as it is in the US, not even close, right? And if a lot of that, I think, to me, comes back to the history of the country, right? When you take all these countries that were sort of toppled, right? They were sort of like another country came in and sort of took them over and basically made them slaves in one form or another. That lasts. Like, that doesn't just go away, in the thinking of people and the consciousness of people. That plays out hundreds of years later in sort of how people think about freedom, how they think about themselves. And so, the sort of battle we've been seeing being set up forever between China and the US. The US has to fall. The US has to be toppled for the cabal's plans to work, because the people in the US believe that they're free, and they believe they should be free, right? They believe in freedom, and they believe they should have freedom. Much of the world doesn't believe that, right? Much of the world has been defeated in that way already. And so China is really dangerous, right? In a certain sense. I laugh because ultimately nothing's actually dangerous and blah, blah. But, China is really dangerous in a certain sense from that perspective. We do not want the ideology of the CCP to take over the world, right? We do not want the Chinese Communist Party to be, they're already major players, but to be, sort of world dominant players and thinkers, right? Under that scenario, like, the world has fallen. We have lost. So, Yeah, so the US matters very much. What people believe matters very much. Freedom and understanding the importance of freedom and believing that you should have freedom. And as Americans, like, we don't really understand that, right? We're so indoctrinated into the American ethos, which includes freedom. It's hard for us to even conceive of, I mean, there's people that don't value freedom. Yeah, there are. A good chunk of the world doesn't really value freedom. Like, they don't even think that it's something that they're supposed to have. So that's a big, that's a big difference, and it matters.
Yeah, that's such a foreign concept to me. I can't even wrap my head around that. That's yeah, but that's a good place to end it. I think I got to get going to do other stuff, but we will be back at 2 Eastern with the interview with a PhD scientist talking all about PCR tests, so our PCR technology. So that'll be a great one to break down and really get into detail about what it is, what it's used for, what it's supposed to be used for, and why is it not valid to be testing for a quote unquote virus. So that'll be a fun conversation, and hope to see everyone there. And any last words before we get going?
No, man, it was fun when I enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll see you all later this afternoon.
All right. Please like, share, subscribe, especially over on Rumble, and join the Telegram chat. That's started to get a little bit more active these days, and we're going to keep that up. And so we will see you there. All right. Have a good